Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about campaign customization in Total War Pharaoh. This is one of the main features of the game and can really make for a varied and interesting experience when you are playing a campaign in the game. Like, I've done default campaigns, but I've had a lot more fun with the game going with campaign customization. I'm just going to go over the settings that I personally use, my reasoning for using them, and just covering the things that you could take a look at to make for a more interesting experience. So, there are pre-campaign and during campaign options. The things that are during campaign you can change whenever you decide to do so. Although it is legendary, okay, fair enough. The things pre-campaign you can only change before you start a campaign. The stuff that's during campaign you can change wherever you want to do. Like, hey, you want to disable diplomatic trespassing penalty, that is your choice. You want to change attrition damage, you want to go over those kind of things. Those are your choices that you can make. So let's take a look at things. One of the things I would certainly do is setting a higher starting budget. One of the things that really annoys me with Total War games over the years is that you have such limited early game resources, and it forces you to make a bunch of decisions that are pretty stupid in a lot of ways, but you just want to maximize your resource output. Creative Assembly, I think, has this perception, this stupid perception, and I'm sorry, if they genuinely think this, it is really stupid how they're thinking. Like, oh, we're fine taking it slow, we're fine having a limited empire. No, Creative Assembly has taught us again and again and again, especially as we play on higher and higher difficulties, that taking it slow is a surefire way to get crushed. So the way you succeed on something like Legendary, or the way you succeed on higher difficulties, is you need to go be aggressive, you need to conquer territory, you need to eliminate your opponents. If you wait, if you give the initiative to the enemy, you will lose. So that means you need resources. There are ways of doing it, especially with the trading system for Troy, but it is not a great situation to have to basically every turn, like you're going bankrupt every turn, and every turn you're having to trade away resources or capture territory and sell it to the AI factions. It doesn't create a great campaign experience. So having higher resources is one of the things that will help with that, especially early on. Now, the positive values, I don't think they matter one way or another unless you're willing to set it to low. I don't think you're going to run out of resources even with 20,000, but hey, if you want to be certain you never run out of it, set it to high or even medium. Now, random faction starting positions and personalities, that can make for an interesting campaign perspective because you will have randomization over there. I think it would be interesting, I think it would be interesting if you could have a choice, like you could start in a random position. That could make things more interesting on the campaign map from my perspective. Civil War max participants, there's pros and cons with this. So if you set a max participation limit in a Civil War, then it means unless you're joining a Civil War early, you're probably not going to be able to join that Civil War. Like with 2, I think, like you can't, like unless you're the one triggering the Civil War, you will not be able to join it. With medium, with high, there will be some limitations and you might be forced to join a Civil War before you're ready. I think the 2, the maximum participants, like represents like the person challenging the King of Hati or the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh or King of Hati themselves. So that is one of the problems with that system. At the same time, having a limitation on this, having some kind of limitation on participants in the Civil War can make the Civil Wars be faster, so less annoying, because it limits diplomacy, limits vassalization agreements, all that kind of stuff for the factions that are engaged in the Civil War. Royal Decree's research rate, I would set this to high. You can either slow it down or you can increase it. Creative Assembly has this weird idea where they think we want to spend hundreds of turns in a campaign. We do not. Not the way their games are designed right now. We don't. At least that's my personal perspective. Feel free to disagree with me on that, but I think a lot of people do enjoy shorter campaigns because long campaigns are poorly designed in Total War, and I'll be blunt, what I'm seeing in Pharaoh is not really conducive towards a long campaign either. It can be fun, don't get me wrong, but it's like if you're telling me I'm going to spend hundreds of turns on this map, but these mechanics, no. So increasing research rate can avoid one of the issues that we've seen again and again and again in Total War games as for quite a few years right now, where you have a lot of research options, but you are going to ultimately go down a particular path because that's the most optimal path. Having higher research, increasing the research time, create more opportunities in the campaign to experiment with things, to play with the various things. Like, hey, if I could double the research for, you know, the dwarves very easily in a campaign, beyond, you know, just getting a bunch of students and archivists, that would lead to more interesting campaign choices over there. Oh, by the way, we could really use such a system in Warhammer 3, though we're missing the ability of removing AI stats. So, like, I'll get into battle when I get there, but we're missing the ability of changing, like, what kind of benefits AI gets on higher difficulties and what kind of benefits they get in campaign and battle. Diplomacy deals opinion thresholds. So, you can either make it so that diplomacy is more difficult. Not that diplomacy is really that easy to begin with. Basically, the way the system of diplomacy works in every Total War game is basically you cheese it, right? When you can trade territory, you cheese that to get a lot of money. It doesn't really make sense. So personally, I would set it too high. If I could increase it to like by 10 points as opposed to 20 points, I think that would be better. But all the same, while this will allow you to gain a lot of resources, a lot of agreements, military alliances, vassalization agreements, confederations, I honestly think this is a much better experience than just dealing with the default diplomacy, which feels like a pain in the neck. Also, I want to point out something. It's not like you can't get vassalization agreement and not get deals that screw over the AI in your favor by default. You just need to take a territory, region of territory that's close to them, sell it to them, and they'll basically sell you the farm for that, right? They'll give you everything you want. This avoids that, and I think it leads to a better experience in the campaign because you're no longer going to have to do that. At least as much. Sure, you should be careful though, because this does affect barter agreements. If we had an option to not affect barter agreements when dealing with these kind of deals, I think it would be a bit better, but all the same, I think it's just better setting this to high. Having all the gods discovered, you can either disable or enable deities in a campaign. Personally, I would just rather have all the gods discovered. It's not like you can just pick a god randomly. No, you have to get research, you have a starting god, you can't change that starting god, and then you have to get research for a second god, and after that you get to pick what your second god is. So having those gods available from the start is like, yeah, you can just get it faster, but the gods will become available regardless. You can limit army size. I'm not sure why you'd want to, unless you just want to enjoy playing sieges with 10 units. Don't do it. It's a horrible experience. Personal perspective on that. The auto-resolve I need to mention in the game is reasonably okay. There are some things that are an issue, but for the most part, the battles where it forces you to fight are reasonable enough scenarios. Like, you can auto-resolve your way through an entire campaign, basically, in this game, if you play your cards right. Or you might have to fight a lot of manual battles. Player recruitment capacity, by default, recruitment capacity is set to 2. I would probably increase it to 4. I think this is reasonable enough to, just being able to recruit units faster, not having to wait for it. Does this mean that buildings that increase recruitment capacity are useless? No, far from it. They're very useful all the same, because like you go from 4 to 6. So this will put it default by to 4. You can recruit more stuff, makes it more useful. Now, one particular setting that you may not want to enable is reveal playable area. You can enable it. This will give you a vision on all the factions of the game, see the starting positions. Outside of planning a campaign, I do not believe enabling this is a good idea. The performance on the campaign map is going to tank to begin with, so you're going to have significant performance issues when you can see the entire campaign map from the beginning with all the factions and all their moves. So it's not really a great idea to enable it. Also, you might get factions across the planet declaring war on you for whatever reason. I should point out that just because you get diplomatic deals opinion threshold does not mean that AI cannot declare war on you. They still can. You can disable or keep enabled Pillars of Civilization events. There's pros and cons with this. You can you can disable the disasters that exist with Pillars of Civilization. You can make them frequent. You can make them infrequent. Personally, I just keep all of this stuff by default. I would keep Iron Man disabled. Like, enabled, it's only for legendary. I would personally keep it disabled. The reason I would keep it disabled is not because of the autosave aspect, rather because it creates issues in terms of performance, because you're auto-saving whenever you go into a battle, whenever you're exiting a battle, when you click the enter button, when the enter ends. So you have significant performance bottlenecks throughout the campaign because of that. And I've seen again and again with Warhammer 3 how many performance issues can exist with that. What about character movement? Well, you want to make your campaign fun, more interesting, and just conquer the map? Increase campaign movement range. Personal choice, really. There's pros and cons with this. Keep in mind, it also increases the AI's movement range. Can lead to some more interesting dynamics and can certainly make the campaign faster. I prefer to have this on. You can also disable trespassing diplomatic penalty to not have to deal with that, though it does make military access agreements meaningless. I haven't had much of an issue with this, with keeping this off by default. Attrition damage, you can either make your armies take less attrition, 50% less attrition, or to take more attrition. I probably would decrease the attrition damage, because there's a lot of attrition damage that you take in the game. There are ways to make yourself immune to attrition, but when you're taking attrition, it is very, very significant. It also hurts AI as well, so just bear that in mind. You can also change how rebellions are affected. I would not necessarily mess around with this. As for fully equipped generals, and max rank, I would probably only enable this. Keep in mind, these are things you can change during the course of a campaign. I would only enable this like really later on in the campaign if you just want to recruit down. One thing I would keep on, like switch from off to on, is like you just need to conquer all their settlements under control, so you don't have to deal with their armies anymore. I think their armies become rebel armies with this on, so it's not like their armies just disappear, but it's like you just eliminate the faction. You can disable post-battle replenishment. Not sure why you do want to, but that's just my perspective. You can either disable the Sea People invasions, or decrease the number of armies, or increase those number of armies. Now, here are some things I would change. Like, I would increase casualty replenishment, yes, double it. Here's the thing to keep in mind. Even doubled, you're still going to have replenishment issues. I am not fond of the replenishment system. Anyone who's watched my channel, any of my playthroughs, knows how much I hate it, so keeping that high would be great. Lowering upkeep by 50%, so you have more resources. You cannot afford, with a starting province as any faction, you cannot afford an entire stack unless it's really bad troops. Is annoying. I'll be blunt. It is really fucking annoying what Creative Assembly decided to do that. So it's like, oh, armies cost pretty much the same as they did in Troy, but our economy is far more limited. Great! So we're gonna go bankrupt. It is not a fun experience. That's my perspective. When we're talking about happiness, you can increase it by 10 or 20. I'd probably go with medium, just increase it by 10, so you don't have as many happiness issues. Keep in mind, rebellions are pretty rare by default. It's just like, you won't need to build as many buildings. You could just make it completely irrelevant by increasing by 20, but I think 10 is reasonable enough. Over here, you can make units unbreakable. You can disable auto-resolve battles. If you so desire, you can disable retreat. You can prevent your army from retreating in a battle. I'm not entirely certain this applies to AI. I think it doesn't. So, well, if you want to screw yourself over, that's your prerogative. You can also increase the ammunition and missile units. This will help you in AI, so keep that in mind that if you're dealing with a lot of missile troops in AI armies, they will use this against you. Now, in terms of AI, you can give them more starring money. You can forbid initiating diplomacies. You can toggle diplomatic alliances. You can make the AI more aggressive or more passive. There's pros and cons with this. Like, obviously, you don't want AI to be passive. You want it to achieve, but it's just like in terms of the diplomatic deals. I've tried with aggressive, and I can say that it wasn't necessarily a great experience because it just, the problem that happens, right, is that AI factions have a tendency of, let's say, one faction vassalizes another, right, as you're about to wipe them out. Well, if you declare war, you're going to get screwed because of the negative modifier, so just something to bear in mind. You can increase their replenishment, but they're already pretty good in terms of replenishment. They're good in terms of unit recruitment. Actually, the AI is pretty bad at doing anything with the resource. Like, it might sit on a huge pile of resources and not do anything with it. It's a issue that happened in Troy as well. So they don't have a recruitment capacity or replenishment issue on that. If you can increase those if you really want to, but most of the time I really don't see the AI, at least on Legendary. You can mess these things with these things. I would lower the construction cost of the AI actually builds settlements, but that would be about it. And over here, yeah, just set advisor frequency to low. And this is the profile I've been using, with the exception of like changing AI behavior to default, but everything else is pretty much as I have already talked about it over here. And those are the settings that I would personally use in terms of campaign. I've had a good amount of fun. Now keep in mind what this is going to do. It is going to make the early game significantly faster than it is before, and it's going to make it a steamroll. But at the same time, it just means that you avoid the issue that exists when Warhammer 3, where it's like the vast majority of what you're doing in a campaign is the early game bullshit. You avoid that. Now, to be clear, this is not like be-all and end-all. I think in some campaigns it's ridiculous the things you can do. To give you an idea, I've won a campaign in Shupaliuma, and I'm talking here ultimate victory in like 23 turns. Granted, I abused the vassalization system, I didn't have a lot of territory or legitimacy, but just keep that in mind, keep that particular aspect in mind when we're talking about this. And also, like Shupaliuma, I was able to do it as quickly because he can vassalize from the very beginning because he is a great king. Only pharaohs or great kings or contenders for great kings and pharaohs can vassalize other factions, so the fact that you can do it as Shupaliuma from the very beginning gives you a significant amount of power in his campaign. I think Shupaliuma has a ridiculous amount of campaign potential. Anyway, that is all. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. Let me know what settings you'd like to use during the course of a campaign.